scripture reading today is from 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 16 through 28. It says, Solomon's wisdom and judgment. Later, 2 women who were prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then on the 3rd day, after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were together. There was no one else with us in the house. Only the 2 of us were in the house. Then this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your servant slept. She laid him at her breast and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, clearly it was not the son I had born. But the other woman said, No, the living son is mine, and the dead son is yours. The first said, No, the dead son is yours, and the living son is mine. So they argued before the king. Then the king said, The one says, This is my son who is alive, and your son is dead. While the other says, Not so. Your son is dead, and my son is the living one. So the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. The king said, Divide the living boy in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other. But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, Please, Lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him. The other said, It shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it. Then the king responded, Give her the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. Into this day will break moments of awareness, tiny shards of light that illume the whole reality of existence.
May this reading be such a moment, and may we be blessed by its gift. Amen.
The wisdom of Solomon. I think as many of us grew up when they talked about wisdom, that was one of the names that was commonly brought up. My clicker's not going to work here, so there we go. 1 Kings, we heard the scripture from 1 Kings, and we certainly, most of us, I think, have heard that story. I'd like to share some of this biblical knowledge for some of the young people out there. As I was preparing for this, I was asking people, younger people who've never heard the story. Never had heard the story. So the story of the baby and the sword, I think many of us have heard that many, many times. And wisdom, I think that's one of the things we go at. But I wonder how many times in your day you go around and say, geez, I just met a wise person. Or that person is wise. Do we even use the word wisdom much anymore? We might say smart, intelligent, or something like that. So a little bit on that heritage of Solomon, famous for a temple, famous for wisdom, and famous for a prayer. King David, last week Kim talked about King David. From David and Goliath fame, but they're ruling. But he was the son of King David. See the time frame, almost 3,000 years ago. Another one of the things he was famous for is he had peace because he led 12 different districts, and they were very different. But he was able to rule them all successfully. Many times those differences caused challenges between, but for whatever reason, he had the wisdom to get through 40 years of peace. We can't do that almost anywhere in our world right now, but he did it what they considered their world. So once again, he was famous for his wisdom, the baby story, as well as if he did see enemies coming for him, he would always send out a courier to talk with them, and they would compromise, and they would stay in peace. So what does a wise person pray for? Kings 3:9. Give thy servant an understanding heart to judge my people, that I may discern good from bad. How many people pray for their baseball team to win, for them to get a good job? He prayed for an understanding heart. Understanding, I think that's a critical word in our life, to really understand other people, to really understand what's going on, or is only your perspective doesn't allow you to understand those things. And your heart, empathy, compassion, that's what he wanted to rule by. And then the basics, good and bad, right and wrong. I see people struggle with that, and I don't understand. I don't understand that. But what does a wise person pray for? An understanding heart, and to be able to discern good from bad. His decisions, that's what made it that successful, right? His decisions. And his decisions were followed up with actions. He was able to build this temple, one of the famous things, Solomon's temple. You can only do that under peacetime. Otherwise, you're spending too much money on soldiers and being at the front lines. But he realized that in order to be prosperous, he had to have peace. He had to have peace. And that's what his decisions led him to, his peace. Once again, he was able to build the temple. He was also one of those people that realized that these differences, they came with power. They came with strength as well. And if you nurture those differences, you can nurture those strengths. A lot of people still struggle with that today, don't they? Trying to nurture those differences into strengths. So how did he do that? When he was going to make a decision, he made it on righteousness. Righteousness. Once again, I bring some words up that I don't know how many times are used as you go through your week. Wisdom, righteousness. As I looked at righteousness, I had to go according to vision, definition, acting in accord with divine or moral law, free from guilt or sin. Well, the divine law, I don't know if you have to be religious to have divine law. I think most of us know what basic morals are, right? I think we understand that. When you go by the commandments or anything about life, we understand what morals are. But when you make a decision, are you trying to make sure it's a righteous decision, a fair decision, a moral decision? Well, that's what Solomon would do. But why can we not always be fair and righteous? Differences. Different color skin, different language, different sexual identities, different clothes, different hairstyles, different political parties. Oh my gosh, red or blue. Can we treat somebody of the other political party fair? I see some people struggling with that. So differences. As Pastor Dave has been in front of us in his short time here, he likes to quote Yoda. He's a big Star Wars guy. Well, as we talked about this, Yoda's quote is, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. But what leads to fear? Differences. When we see something different, for some reason, we have fear. Are they a threat because they're different from me? Are they a threat to my culture because they're different from me? Difference leads to fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. A equals B, B equals C, right? A equals C. I think it works out that way. This was another little quote I see out there. Obviously, as we go through these proverbs, that's where we're kind of going to some of these conventional wisdom sayings. Fear doesn't exist anywhere but in the mind. Ignorance. Or ignorance, yeah. That sometimes those differences are maybe a lack of intelligence on that, a lack of understanding, maybe along that line. Proverbs, wise saying. Got a whole book of the Bible in here on Proverbs, right? I brought my Bible. As I talked about Solomon, I like to do a lot of fact checking. See, I've kind of used this book a few times. Isaac's Asimov guide. This is how you fact check the Old Testament. You don't go to the internet. But Isaac Asimov, and you see I've been using this book. I think my first notes in the back are from like 2001. So. And then, of course, as I researched Solomon, I got this other book's kind of tattered, too. They say a person's Bible is tattered, their life may not be. I'm not not sure if that's a true statement or not. But Proverbs, most of them are all attributed to Solomon, but they're all not Solomon's Proverbs. People have put them in there, they've modified them, but obviously Proverbs is a Solomon heritage where wise sayings can be beneficial for us at different times. Some of the most famous Proverbs I found in there was spare the rod, spoil the child. Yeah, we've heard of that one, right? We've heard of that one. And pride goeth before the fall. I still hear that being quoted in some situations. So there's a couple of the famous Proverbs from ancient times. I went through some conventional wisdom as I was talking to people as I was prepared for this. Pick your battles, mind your own business, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, right? Eat healthy, don't bite off more than you can chew, don't bite the hand that feeds you. God helps those who help themselves. Pastor Dave made that clear to me. That's not in the Bible. But you would think it would be, right? But that was not in there. Treat others as you want to be treated. Andy Griffith, Maid Marian. Some of us who've got some gray hair, we might have watched that show a few times. One of the things I found interesting about Andy Griffith, he was wise. He had an understanding heart, didn't he? He knew people's situation, and he would modify his decisions on the situation. I thought that was a great wisdom training for our youth as we came up watching Andy Griffith. Another one, can't please everybody, and listen more than you talk. Listen more than you talk. But why don't we follow a lot of those conventional wisdoms? We've all heard them, but sometimes we skip them. Why is that? Like I said, many of these other famous people have come out with these quotes. We seldom talking too little, but very often talking too much. It's a well-known maxim, which everybody knows and nobody practices. And I'm kind of going through it right now, right? I'm doing all the talking, and you're kind of listening. Conventional wisdom, why don't we follow it? I'm smarter than the average bear. We're smarter than the average bear. We don't have to follow conventional wisdom. This is a special situation when I or we are involved. No empathy, no understanding of somebody walking 1,000 miles to get to a country that they feel will be better for their family. Power. Abraham Lincoln would say that if you want to check a person's integrity, don't give them adversity, give them power. And I think we've seen many people in our society, when they get that power, it's a little out of hand, doesn't it? It's a little out of hand. I think that's one of the things we have to be careful of is wisdom, is how we use our power. We can tell whether they're wise or not. And then the challenge of the world is picking on you, so I need to get everything I can. I don't need empathy. The world is tough, so I don't need to follow conventional wisdom. Some modern ones. Hope is not a strategy, right? That's a new one. Don't believe everything you see on the internet. I think that's conventional wisdom or modern conventional wisdom. We don't learn from history. History will repeat itself. And it is okay to scroll by if you're upset. So some of the conventional wisdom out there. Once again, why do we not follow that is some of the things I find interesting. Some more, what I would say, modern conventional wisdom. I cannot give you a formula for success, but I can give you the formula for failure, which is try to please everybody. As we were going through the building of this church, that was one of the biggest challenges, right? A lot of different people, a lot of different attitudes, but if you try to please everybody, you never get anywhere. Dale Carnegie, Charles Deming, a couple people that I would say within the last century that came up with a lot of good proverbs, wise saying. Any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do. But it takes character and self-control to be understanding and forgiving. New word brought in here, forgiving, right? Forgiving. But Dale Carnegie, I think he's someone that we many times quote as we go through. So I'm going to go back to another one of his proverbs or his points. His core idea was to change other people's behavior by changing their behavior towards them. Many, many businesses, big corporations use this in order to make their group better, to have peace within their organization, because then they have what? Prosperity, success, right? So Dale Carnegie, he sounds a lot like Solomon to me, and we go through that. But now we need to talk about the application of wisdom. The first time I heard this poem was in our church, our old church. But let's talk about now the application of wisdom. 2 frogs fell into a deep cream bowl. One was an optimistic soul, but the other took a gloomy view and said, I shall drown, and so will you. So with his last despairing cry, he flung up his legs and said goodbye. Said the other frog with a merry grin, I can't get out, but I won't give in. I'll just swim around till my strength is spent, and I will die more content. Bravely he swam till it would seem his struggles began to churn the cream. On top of the butter, at last he stopped, and out of the bowl he happily hopped. You can see that poem was written by the leader of the Boy Scouts back in the day. Wisdom. The frog learned from its life experience that effort applied at a certain time can change outcomes. The underdog, right? The underdog. Life experiences, the application of our knowledge and wisdom. The frog applied the knowledge of swimming. The frog applied the knowledge of wisdom that says if one keeps trying, one may succeed, even though many others say you will not succeed. Using the knowledge gained from the human experience in a righteous and understanding and intelligent fashion. That's what I consider a wise person is today. You use your intelligence, you apply it at the right time in a righteous, understanding, and intelligent fashion. We need to be wise, right? Our life needs to be done in a wise fashion. I mentioned this phrase is not from the Bible. God helps those who help themselves. Effort, self-initiative, right? Wisdom. Things don't happen. Hope is not a strategy, right? This saying's been around way before the Bible. The polytheistic Greek society would say self-initiative is a way to get yourself out of trouble. Nowadays, most people give that saying to Ben Franklin. He didn't do it. But he gets most of the credit for that saying. Well, let's talk about your own personal wisdom for a minute. I think in order to be wise, you need to be honest. And being honest with oneself, I think, is a challenge. We all have a perception of ourselves that's probably a little bit brighter than it may be. So be honest. We must know our good and our bad qualities. Effort. Hope is not a strategy, right? We have to put something into everything for a good outcome. Advice. That was one of the things we go through the book here when they talk about 1 Kings is some of Solomon's challenges were he wouldn't take advice. Jezebel. You've probably heard that name in your biblical history. Solomon and Jezebel. He should have took his counsel's advice. And how do we know good and bad? You're living. Your life experiences have taught you what is good and bad, so make good decisions. And once again, wise decisions are right, moral, and fair. So when you got to make a decision, review your options. Knowledge. Maybe some of you have seen the movie many years ago, A Slumdog Millionaire. What I thought was interesting about that movie is he's ended up being on a game show, but the point is, he would go back in his life experiences and he was able to answer these questions. He had learned things previous in the life, and his wisdom was he knew when to apply that knowledge. And he was able to apply it at the right time. So when you learn something, many times people say, I'm never going to use that. You never know. Next thing you know, you're saying, man, am I glad I knew that. I can apply it at this time, and it's going to make me successful. It's going to give me purpose. Once again, when you look at your options, pick the best option. Once again, be honest that you're picking those options, and then give it your best effort. General Pat would say, a good plan implemented with effort today is better than a great plan implemented next week. And I guess that was tested under fire, if you will. And a direction without action is stationary, right? So as we talk about this wisdom. For wisdom will enter your heart and knowledge will be pleased to the soul. Kim last week talked about purpose and contentment. Wisdom helps you get to purpose and contentment. But then the last one. This is also a proverb that I think everybody, well, it's a joke, but a wise thing. The abundant years may not be wise, nor my elders understand justice. Living a long time doesn't necessarily make you wise. Young people can very easily be wise. So we just can't always say our elders, because believe it or not, sometimes those elders may be wrong. Some wisdom. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, I share a birthday with him, so I always try to use his quotes whenever I can. A single conversation across the table with a wise man or woman is better than 10 years of book study. Conversations, community, that's one of the things we always try to do. You can learn more by interacting with people sometimes than by just reading a book. Artificial intelligence, that's one of the things that's coming out there now. Artificial intelligence. Where does that come into our world of changing our decision, right? The reason for understanding is a critical element in wisdom. Computers, do they have understanding? Do they have understanding? The human experience of living is one of the most important variables in our wisdom. Computers, trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. As I was reading a book on robots, they said it's not called artificial wisdom for a reason. Right? Your GPS ever taken you to the wrong place? Yeah. Sometimes that will happen, right? Trial and error. Intelligence is applying knowledge for a desired outcome. So true wisdom, coming together of knowledge guided by the human experience. Artificial intelligence, folks, I don't think it's going to be our answer to where we need to go. It's our own wisdom. It's a combination of our emotions, our knowledge, or what we call is logic. Is what we call is logic. Once again, you can kind of look at that yourself there. Wisdom is the application of those laws for living a fulfilled and purposeful life. Contentment. I think as one goes through life, what do we like about contentment? Chris and I were just talking a little bit before the service about being content right now. Why are we content? Because we're living a fulfilled and purposeful life. That's wisdom. That's wisdom. If I know people who are content, usually there's some wisdom involved in some of those decisions. Dale Carnegie, to go back to him, he brought up the term forgiveness. And being a Christian, we've heard that word before in our past. Forgiveness. Why is it wise? Why would a wise person forgive? Redemption? Get me to heaven? Personal issues? This is probably one of the most important proverbs I've ever heard about forgiveness. It doesn't change the past, but it can change the future. Think about the times that you've been forgiven or forgave somebody. Did it change your future for the positive? I think that's one of the, what I'd call a modern proverb, right? A modern proverb. Forgiveness is part of self-peace, the satisfaction with oneself, and wisdom. How did we try to promote wisdom a couple decades ago? We gave everybody a bracelet that said WWJD, right? What would Jesus do? It would prompt us to be wise. I consider Jesus a wise person as I go through our past. When we talk about accepting differences, the things that lead to anger, hate, fear. Jesus was our role model in accepting differences. That didn't bother him, right? the poor, the lame, the sick, the rich, the tax collectors. He accepted a good role model for us, right? Supporting forgiveness? Well, yeah, once again, he's our role model for forgiveness, right? He's our role model for forgiveness. So as you go forward, I hope you kind of look at that statement there. Might not have the right to do it, but it's the right thing to do. And I've seen it the other way too. You have the right to do it, but it's not the right thing to do. Right and wrong, good and bad. Come on, let's try to have righteous decisions as we go forward. Now, as we move forward down our life, it's probably going to be difficult for us to be as wise as Solomon and how he's depicted in our Bible. But I'm telling you, if we do a little bit more good decision making, wise decisions, it will give us inner peace and self-purpose. So to finish, Solomon knew 3,000 years ago, being accepting differences is going to allow you to have peace and prosperity. I hope if we do anything in our future, we can do that. So thank you very much.